Hi fam. Once again, I am way too late to this conversation. Everything that there is good to say about this topic has been said. And yet, I am a yapper. I must yap. I have notes. I have pages of notes. I have weeks worth of notes that I've been taking on this and trying to get my thoughts in order because I have feelings. I have feelings about this topic and nowhere to put them except my unhinged Instagram stories, which I encourage you not to follow. So hi, welcome back. I'm Cadence. I talk about shit on the internet due to lack of other outlets in my life. And today we're going to talk about the thing that everyone has already moved on from way too quick in my opinion, and who much smarter and better people than me have much smarter and better takes on than me, and yet here we are. I got shit to say. We are talking about Tradwives, and specifically in response to the Ballerina Farm viral article which came out and which everyone reacted to and counter-reacted to. It's got people in a tizzy, and for good reason, because it doesn't exist in isolation. I've already talked about sex and smut, so let's go. We're talking about heteronormative patriarchy today. Why it's appealing, why it's good for some, why it's bad for others, and why it's trending now, and all of the complicated feelings that a girl who was raised in a heteronormative patriarchal religion might have complicated feelings for it. So by now, I'm sure that if you've clicked on this, you've probably read or reacted to the reactions to the Ballerina Farm profile article, which went out earlier this summer. And there's layers to this. And far be it from me to be able to touch on all of them all at once, but it has been living rent-free in my head ever since it got published. And the fact that people, myself included, are still thinking about it and still reacting to it or publishing content about it or commenting on it is not an accident, I don't think. So if you haven't read it, too long didn't read, Ballerina Farm is the online handle of a very prominent Tradwife content creator. She is herself Mormon, put a pin in that, and she lives on a ranch in Utah with her husband and multiple children, and she promotes, creates content around this Tradwife lifestyle. It's a hashtag. It is a genre of media and content. Put a pin in that one too. Anyway, the appeals of the Tradwife content are that it portrays a slower pace of life, a more traditional pace of life, almost exclusively around heterosexual couples who have multiple children and try to live sustainably. They try to live, they engage in what's called slow living. So probably limiting access to technology, at least in aesthetic. They tend to promote or create content around self-sufficiency, i.e. cooking their own food, possibly that they've grown or raised in some capacity. They tend to be very family focused. Again, multiple children are not a requirement of this genre of content, but are very typical of this genre of content. There's an element that pays nod to nature and natural living, i.e. making your own products from scratch wherever possible, harvesting your own products harvesting your own materials to make as many of your products as possible. Getting you, yourself, your kids, your family outside into nature, not feeling as divorced from it as modern life sometimes does. There's also a subtext to all of this, which is the glorification of almost the homesteading lifestyle, an idea that an individual or a family unit are bootstrapping. They are pulling themselves up by the sweat of their brow and eating literally the fruits of their own labors and nurturing a family unit somewhat isolated and protected from the slings and arrows of outrageous modern society. Cool. The problem is, well, there are many problems to this, but again, in my Instagram rants, which I encourage you not to watch, I talk a lot about media literacy and media awareness, and the fact that so many aspects of our current media and social media environments do not exist in isolation. And that's where so much of my emotional reaction to Tradwife content starts from. It's that in isolation, sustainability and sustainable living is good. In isolation, slower living, detoxing from media and social media and technology is good. Positive self-sufficiency is good and admirable. Being focused on your family is good and admirable. Having a healthy respect for nature and the natural world is good and admirable. The thing about Tradwife content is that all of the elements of it in isolation are good and admirable. But the whole point and the long rambling thesis of this rant is going to be that none of these things actually exist in isolation. None of them. It's not possible for them to, and the things that they don't exist in isolation from are weird, off-putting, and possibly even bad. I talk a lot on my Instagram media rants about the Venn diagram of online content spaces and media spaces and social spaces in generally. And it is possible to exist in multiple online spaces at once without even realizing what you might be sliding into or might be a part of. And fundamentally, Tradwife content, this glorification of a very specific gendered dynamic with a very specific glorified way of living and way of moving through the world doesn't exist in isolation. It never has. There is a long and rich media history of glorifying a past that never really existed to begin with. And it's not incidental to me that Tradwife content is becoming popular in our current moment when so many other things that glorify past that might not have existed in reality are also on the rise. Before I go any further, I gotta set out some priors, because it is so easy and dangerous and possible to slip into conspiratorial thinking here, and I want to be clear that I'm trying to avoid that. I want to be clear again about the Venn diagram, the layers of online content, emotional discourse spaces. And just because you belong to one does not mean that you necessarily belong to another. The point I'm trying to make is that so many of them overlap that you have to enter these spaces and participate in these spaces with very, very open eyes. Because if you aren't doing so, you are likely to slide into spaces that you might not always see coming or appreciate. And Tradwife content exists in some interesting overlapping spaces, again, that I think are harmful. In isolation, fine. What we're talking about, stripped to the studs, is a genre of media content. It's the layers that cause the problems. What is the appeal of Tradwife and Tradlife content? It's not too hard for me. I think, and I'll come back to this hopefully at the end if I can tie these thoughts together intelligently, that we live in a complicated modern world. The modern world is complex, and the desire for a simple life is very appealing. To not have to worry about or even think about so many of the things that cause societal pressures and stresses, that cause friction in socio-political and economic relationships. The desire for a life that can be controlled and contained and understood in fairly simplistic terms is emotionally appealing. I think we just have to take that as true. I think that is why, so many, and I don't say this derogatorily, simplistic worldviews are as appealing as they are. This is why specific religious or political frameworks are as appealing as they are. They put a complicated world into a simplistic reality. Things are put into either or, good and evil, black and white categories. And that's a more comfortable way to live your life. Let's be blunt. It is harder to have to parse the complexities of life for all of us. That is the human condition. That's why we have a million different philosophies and religions, all of which are in wild disagreement with one another. We're all trying to make sense of a complex reality, and a lot of people long for a more simple one. Fine. Again, in isolation, the Tradwife and the Tradlife content starts to get more complicated, though, when other emotional layers are added. A lot of people who are drawn to or participate in this kind of content, which again glorifies self-sufficiency, glorifies a hetero family unit, glorifies and uplifts very traditional gendered roles, also glorifies a degree of separatism from society. A lot of these people are advocating for homeschooling or for divesting themselves from not traditional mainstream medicine or mainstream schooling or mainstream societal participation. And again, in isolation, there might be very good and legitimate reasons for this. You might have children with special needs. You might not live in an area that you think is particularly well served by the social services that you want for your family. You may, as an individual or as a family unit, choose to make specific decisions because you genuinely believe that they are for the good of your family. Again, as a flat statement, great. Tradwife and Tradlife content is not coming at this from a flat statement. And generally, they are performatively rejecting mainstream medicine, mainstream schooling, and mainstream even living, particularly people who are living off the grid or, emphasis on those air quotes. And again, I will come back to this. We're just putting pins in everything here. But performatively rejecting normal participation in normal society with in some cases unspoken, and in other cases very, very loudly spoken statement that normal society is bad, wrong, or harmful in some way. Whether you are rejecting the toxins in chemicals that mean you have to use all natural cleaning products, or whether you are rejecting the woke ideology of public schooling agendas, or whether you are rejecting the the satanic influence of the world. A lot of Tradwife and Tradlife content, in a very gentle, aesthetic way, is performatively separatist. It is removing oneself and one's family unit, and usually one's children, if they have them, from normal society because of an understanding that normal society is somehow harmful, toxic, bad, or even outright evil. Skeptical, to use a more discourse-friendly term. It is skeptical of society. It is skeptical of secularism. It is skeptical of governments. It is skeptical of medicine. It is skeptical of food and drug, whatever. And the other aspect that is either, again, unspoken and obliquely referenced to or very loudly stated is a sort of romantic view that a past age or time was simpler. When you didn't have to deal with these kind of complexities, when you didn't have to deal with chemicals or the FDA or LGBT people existing in public. It is romanticizing a past that never existed. Chemicals have always existed. They're just different molecular compounds of different products. People have been putting lead on their faces for an awful long time. Witness ancient Rome. Gay people have always been with us. Witness ancient Rome. But, being sarcastic, but like people trying to deal with bad water and the public health crises that come from us have always been with us. So a lot of current, mostly American, but let's say Western European Tradwife content is romanticizing a past, therefore, that literally never existed. Society has always wrestled with the inclusion of others. It has always wrestled with how to address public health versus personal freedoms. It has always wrestled politically of how people live with one another. Always, that is, again, the human condition. And a romanticization of a false past that never existed is historically problematic. It's one of the hallmarks of fascism. Let's be blunt. I'll stop this bit here, but just like pivoting away from that and going back to the space where I can actually speak from a career professional perspective, let's talk about trad life and tradwife content from the media lens. Because setting aside the philosophical conflicted underpinnings, I cannot get away from the fact that this stuff is hashtag content. These people who create it or who consume it or who idealize it are so far removed from the performativity of the lifestyle that they're putting on camera that it kind of breaks my brain a little bit. If you were truly living off the grid, you wouldn't be filming your life and editing it for Instagram. You wouldn't be curating your speech patterns and what you present to the world for an audience at all. You would just be doing it. We're talking about content. We're talking about people who are packaging product. Now, whether or not they are actively selling you items that they're encourage you to buy for which they get a cut, which again is how the whole influencer media ecosystem works, they're possibly packaging you a lifestyle, or they are packaging you an ideology. They are selling and presenting something. And for that reason, again, it's impossible to take this kind of content in isolation. The medium is the message, as the saying goes. The fact that this is being performed for an audience to either sell an idea, an aesthetic, or indeed actual products is the whole point. I can't stress this enough. If you live less on the grid, or if you live sustainably, or if you choose to stay at home and be the primary caregiver to your children, or whatever, good for you. I cannot stress this enough. But if living this way is your brand or is your business, we're having a very different conversation, because we're not actually talking about individual choices. We're not actually talking about the lifestyle of individual family units. We're talking about a genre of media, which means we need to be able to apply media criticism, we need to be able to apply media literacy, we need to be able to understand the additional layers of meaning that this content is existing in. That's my point. The clue is in the name. These people are influencers. They are influencing their audience. They are not creating their content in a vacuum. Almost nobody does that. It'd be giving away labor for free, which we tend not to do in this day and age because, late stage capitalism is wild. These people are creating content to provoke an action from their audience. They are trying to get people to do something in response to what they post. When we think of most influencers, most of them are trying to get us to buy something, to click on a link, to like, comment, and subscribe. That's the case for a lot of these people. And in other cases, they might not be selling an overt product, but they're still selling an idea or an aesthetic. And in some cases, the reaction that they are trying to provoke is not necessarily a positive one, but a negative one, because hate clicks are just as valuable to an algorithm as a heart. And the thing that goes so unspoken in these kinds of discussions or debates is, I'm not going to call it the role of privilege, but there are women living traditional lifestyles in undocumented or traditional tribes in the Amazon. They're not creating content about their lifestyle. There are indigenous women in the far north, in the Arctic circles, who are whaling and hunting seals and herding reindeer, who are not making content about their lifestyle. There are women who live off the grid, who are milking the cows at 4 a.m. and conceiving and birthing children without medical intervention, and they aren't making content about their lifestyle. And I don't say any of that derogatorily. I'm not trying to degrade those choices. And frankly, apparently there are some really cool Inuit influencers. Great. But that's their job. Where privilege does come back and is really, really self-evident in the whole Ballerina Farm controversy is the Ballerina Farm woman is rich. She's rich because she married a rich man. She married a billionaire's son. And viewed through that lens, her participation in Tradwife and Tradlife content is odd, because she is simultaneously cosplaying as the lady of the manor and also a homestead wife on the prairie, which is so American. We want the benefits of wealth and rank and privilege, but we also want to be seen to be bootstrapping our way through life. It's very strange, but it is still, either way you look at it, it is performative in both directions. And I can't stress enough, if you live this way or this appeals to you, great, go, enjoy. There's nothing wrong with wanting to live sustainably. There's nothing wrong with wanting to prioritize your home and your family. This content, though, and the aesthetics of the content do not exist in isolation. They exist in very specific, coded or explicit appeals to past ages, to past gendered dynamics, past economic dynamics, which insist upon a male breadwinner, a female caregiver, and very specific kind of interactions with one's community, with one's partner, with one's resources, that just very seldom manifest in reality, certainly not to that aesthetic degree. Women who are up at 4 a.m. milking their own cows generally don't have La Mer facial cream products. Most women who don't have access to high quality healthcare, who are giving birth to multiple children, are at extremely highly elevated risks when it comes to pregnancy and childbirth. The Tradwife content lifestyle is not what actual femininity within patriarchal culture has really ever looked like. Except to, again, that lady of the manor, that privileged woman who can delegate most of her labor to badly paid servants and unpaid serfs or slaves. Which again makes the American version of this that marries the lady of the manor. So the beautiful Prairie or milkmaid dresses, the aesthetic showcasing of homeschooling your children in a very beige toned homeschool room before you go and whip them up pancakes from scratch, all in a beautiful sundress. That's not the reality of people who are actually mostly homeschooling their children or growing their own crops. The aesthetic, the design, the style, the visual appeal of a lifestyle normally requires a degree of money, normally requires a degree of comfort that authentic practitioners of that lifestyle do not get, and often don't expect, because they're operating under extreme duress for socioeconomic political circumstances, or choose to, or in some cases don't choose to, engage with for religious asceticism reasons. It's a style. It's an aesthetic, to use the Tumblr language. And again, in isolation, it's fine. It's nice to look at pretty things. It's nice to go, oh, I wish I looked that good swanning around my kitchen. Or, oh, wow, she has 14 children and her hair still looks like that. Go off, sis. Like, great. But that's not what the sales pitch actually is for the people who it appeals to the most. The great and good Chelsea Fagan over at The Financial Diet, who again has done a much better job of tackling this topic than I have, and I will link that video in the comments, asks the really important question of who this aesthetic is for. And she and the commenters on that video go into the whole deep dive of Mormonism. I've gone into Mormonism before, particularly as it affects my own sexuality. I'm going to try to avoid that here. I want to talk about the idea of who this content is for more broadly, because a lot of this content is packaged for people who are shopping. It is packaged for people with an aspiration to a lifestyle, an aspiration to a degree of leisure that would afford the beautiful visuals they're seeing on the screen, which again, if they were actually farming in Albania somewhere, would not even be on the menu. They are aspiring to a less complicated life, let's be blunt, one that's probably free of a lot of commercial or economic constraints, which means that they don't have the luxury of staying home with their kids, or don't have the luxury of having to manage several hundred acres which they outright own because they're too busy getting their weekly paycheck. A lot of the aesthetics also specifically cater to a heterosexual male gaze, in the sense that, ooh, she is the content creators are, or the ones who rise to the surface, are incredibly beautiful and traditionally appealing, and tick a lot of the culturally heteronormative boxes of being pretty women, who transition effortlessly into being beautiful mothers, who still maintain their sex appeal while still running a pristine home and running a family's entire social agenda. These women don't actually exist. And the first wave of the feminist revolution, the Betty Friedan's of the world, were speaking out explicitly of the fact that that entire lifestyle, that entire expectation was literally breaking women because it was unachievable. And the demands of that role were unachievable. But here we are in 2024, still cosplaying that. Is it for us? Who's us? So, what is the appeal, the genuine appeal for people who consume Tradwife or Tradwife content? Again, I think for some people it's genuinely the appeal of liking beautiful things, beautifully presented. Everyone likes pretty stuff. We're wired for that. We're wired to like beauty. So when you see a beautiful woman doing a task beautifully, there's something aesthetic, there's something appealing to that. That's, again, fine in isolation. There is a degree also in the presentation when it comes to, a lot of these women are wearing beautiful frocks. What's her face? The supermodel influencer who's literally wearing this season's Rodarte while she's making something or other from scratch, just beautiful trolling vibes. But that's what it is. It's beautiful. It's beautifully presented content. It's for the people who like to look at pretty things or pretty people doing pretty things. Great. That's one layer. The next layer down is the people who look at this kind of content and go, ooh, that's the lifestyle I want, and again, there's an element of aspiration to that, because the people, mostly women, mostly white women, who rise to the surface of this are coming from a degree of privilege. Ballerina Farm girl is married to a billionaire's son who, owns a ranch out in Utah. She's not hurting for money, even if it's, via partnership. And as a result, many of these women are cosplaying two realities at once. They're cosplaying the homestead wife, who's engaged in the all-American project of bootstrapping and self-sufficiency and independence. But she's also kind of cosplaying Lady of the Manor, because to live this kind of life without the drudgery and toil that goes into an authentically traditional off-grid lifestyle means you gotta have some money behind the scenes. You're either outsourcing a lot of your domestic labor, or you're, not always honest about the reliance you have on modern technology or modern services or appliances that do huge portions of it for us. I think there's an aspect of that in the Ballerina Farm article where she does all of the housework for her half dozen children and a husband because her husband doesn't want to pay for domestic labor. Cool. That's a unique kind of dynamic, because in another day and age, middle and upper class white women would outsource a lot of their domestic labor, whether it was, child rearing to nannies, or even, your weekly charwoman who would come in to clean your house for you. At a certain degree of privilege, a lot of domestic drudgery would no longer fall on your shoulders. But so much of the Tradwife and Tradlife content is about insisting that on the creator doing that work, in addition to doing the more domestic aspects of, being a desirable partner and being a very hands-on mother. And this is where the final deeper, darker layers start to slide in, because the surface level, hey, this is pretty and I like it. The next level down is, ooh, it would be nice to live that kind of aspirational lifestyle. The layer down here, at the bedrock is, ooh, this is the lifestyle I and other people should be living. This is where you get religious and political and social economic ideology built in. That what you're seeing on the screen is not just aspirational because it's beautiful or because it conveys or implies a degree of economic independence, but because it conveys a degree of rightness, if not righteousness, that this is the way society should be, is supposed to be. And your mileage on that may vary between, because God said so, or because, I believe that biologically, blah, 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 blah. But it's that bedrock where the problems inevitably arise and where the conflicts and the reactions get so much deeper and more profound. Because it's no longer about choice. Again, it's about biological destiny on one side, or it's about divine destiny on the other. And that's a lot harder to argue with if you're coming at this from a place of zealotry or faith, political or religious. If you think this is how society should be structured, the implications of that get real dark real quick. It means that you genuinely believe that women should be socio-economically dependent on a male partner. It means that you believe women should be, if not outright confined, then restricted to the domestic sphere, because either you believe that we're entirely suited for it or we have a divine calling to it. But that means that you believe that our influence should be limited in other places. If you genuinely believe that your relationship with community should be based on a degree of separatism, i.e., I get to opt out of schooling or public health issues or politics that I don't like, you're living in a fantasy world, because most of us don't have the luxury of opting out of those things. And a lot of the Tradwife content seems to be explicitly for the separatist, almost libertarian male gaze in that respect. It's playing to a fantasy, a fetish, if you will, of living free from other people's expectations or boundaries, supported by a degree of domestic labor, which you don't have to question, being sort of the fief of your own domain. The lady of the manor fantasy implies a lord of the manor somewhere in the mix. And just because it's unspoken in some cases doesn't mean it's not there. Tradwife and Tradlife content, again, you have to be able to view it on multiple levels. And on the surface level, it's not political in the sense that some of the most successful content creators are not explicitly asking for or attempting to make a statement or consolidate power. But scratch the surface and a layer or two down, the people engaging with the content, celebrating the content, amplifying the content, or looking to the content as a model or as an aspiration, do have those ambitions. A lot of the same people who enjoy the Tradlife content are just as likely to fall into the crunchy granola left as they are to the far right. The aesthetic of it is the gateway drug, and it doesn't dictate where you're going to end up. It truly doesn't. You could end up in the far, left granola crunchy pipeline, and suddenly you're no longer vaccinating your children and we get, measles outbreaks. You could end up in the far right content where you suddenly start thinking more about homeschooling as as a religious project to defend your children against woke ideology, i.e. gay people or people of color or what have you. Like, these things all exist alongside one another and they overlap one another. This kind of content isn't inherently bad. The people who make it aren't inherently bad. But you have to understand that the people who make it do so with an agenda. In some cases, they're selling you products. In some cases, they're farming you for rage bait and engagement, mostly to sell you products of some variety. In some cases, they're just doing it for clout. They want attention, or they want to parlay attention into another kind of career. Sometimes they're doing it specifically to influence your thinking. So if you engage with this kind of content or you find it appealing, great, but go in with your eyes open. Know that what you're looking at has layers, and be critical enough to know that the surface level prettiness can be appealing and can also have layers of sinister underneath. Be alive to it. Be aware of what else is being sold to you through very, very beautiful packaging. The aesthetics of privilege within patriarchy are deeply appealing. If you exist in a system that requires a large degree of your labor and your loyalty in order for it to function as patriarchy demands of women, I understand the drive to flip it on its head and to go, okay, but I'm going to look good while doing it, or I am going to demand a degree of influence or compensation or clout for performing this so well for you. It's soft power, but it's still power. Far be it from me to critique people who are trying to protect the power that any given system gives them. I mean, all of us do that, regardless of political persuasion. But again, women who actually live in systems of empowered patriarchy are not making this kind of content. Women in Afghanistan, Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, where laws have just been reenacted that significantly restrict their ability to exist in public without being covered and veiled, they're not making Tradwife content. Women who legitimately exist off of farming the land aren't making Tradwife content. They don't have the time to film and edit themselves. They're farming. they're harvesting. They are raising their children, and they are doing their best. The people who have time to package this up and present it to us in such a beautiful and curated way are not doing so in isolation. They're doing so with a degree of time and privilege and assistance, whether recognized or not, to be able to do so. The subtext of Tradwife and Tradlife content is that there is a right way to be. That if you are the right kind of person, specifically the right kind of woman, mother, partner, citizen, or person of faith, that your life will be easier and better. That you will be able to remove yourself from the vicissitudes of the human condition. That by simplifying your life, you can opt out of the challenges of living in a pluralistic society. And that's just not true. I don't think it is an accident that the Tradwife and Tradlife content is trending now. Just like it's not exactly an accident to me that post the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that suddenly we're seeing all of this pronatalist sentiment rise to the surface again, whether that's pronatalist politicians or, debates over, oh, we're not having enough babies, but we certainly don't want immigration to come into our country. Like, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. The appeal of Tradwife and Tradlife content is the appeal to a simpler world that never was. The idea that society could be simpler and perhaps once was simpler, that we didn't have to deal with the tensions between genders, that we didn't have to deal with the vicissitudes of the modern world, that we didn't have to contend with the demands of a career versus our domestic obligations, that we didn't have to deal with the realities of complex political and social structures where the things that we want and need are sometimes in desperate conflict and contention with one another. And the onus is on us as individuals, as partners, as family units, and as citizens to wrestle with those things. Ultimately, I think the appeal of the trad life and trad life content comes from opting out, from going, no, I don't want to have to deal with those complexities. They're ugly, they're difficult, they're unappealing to me, and I'd rather not. And let me be clear, I would rather not either. Hashtag we live in a society, and living in a society is hard. But most of us don't have the luxury of opting out. Most of us aren't billionaires with bunkers in Hawaii. Most of us aren't married to billionaires with ranches in Utah. Most of us, don't have the luxury of choosing whether to work or to raise children. We have to do both. Most of us have to live in a complex world and society. It's the same appeal as conspiracy thinking. It's the appeal of wanting a simpler world than the one we've actually got. And that's okay. Like, emotionally, that's an okay thing to feel. But when you start shaping your world, your worldview, and your expectations of other people based on that desire, that's where my sympathy runs dry. Because most of the people who advocate for traditional gender roles, or who advocate for binary expectations of sex and gender, most of the people who advocate for simplicity of language and black and white thinking, they're not being honest about the fact that that has never been the way human society has actually been structured. And their desire to return to that is a false one. What they want is a world that is simpler and easier for them to navigate and control and manage. Most of the women who see the appeal of this kind of content do so because it gives them a much clearer vision of what beauty, power, a partner dynamic, or a role of motherhood would look like than the one that they're actually contending with. Most of the men who observe and engage with this kind of content, in my opinion, do so more through the lens of fetish work than reality. They want the simplicity of that kind of portrayed partnership rather than the one that they've got, where their roles as men are changing in real time and they have to contend with the contrasting demands of being an emotional and an economic provider, or what that even means in the modern day and age. Most people who like this sort of thing want a simpler world than the one we've got. But this is the world we live in. So by all means, enjoy traditional content. Enjoy the aesthetic. Lust after the beautiful dresses. God knows I do. A certain insert brand here has taken a lot of my money over the years because I love a good sundress. But know that what the trad life content is selling is the idea of an alternative to the real world, and that alternative doesn't exist. We have to contend with the world as it is. And if you're super brave and politically engaged, or just ethical, you feel some kind of obligation to make the world that you move in, whatever size or scale it is, whatever your community looks like, a little bit better. You want it to function more for more people. You want it to be more comfortable for more people. Or you just want your family unit to thrive and prosper. That's fine. I'm sorry that the world is difficult and not very pretty and really, really complicated. The human condition is contending with the world that we've got, not longing for or trying to superficially or even violently impose the world that we think it should be. I have a great deal more respect for the people doing the hard and complicated work of trying to make the world better than I do for people who romanticize a world that never actually existed. That's just me.